خلاص. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. For all my dear brothers and sisters in Islam, I greet you from the Ummah Masjid. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Today, inshallah, we'll continue with the same somewhat detailed series about the very crucial topic about women and family in Islam. I'm not going to summarize what has been covered because we covered a whole lot, but simply to say that we, after speaking about the spiritual, moral, and human aspects of equality between men and women, we started to talk about the economic rights of women. We spent a whole session on the question of the law of inheritance in Islam and the wrong impression that there is a general rule that always male take twice as much as a female. But then we started to take on the social position of women in Islam. We spoke about a woman as a daughter, as a wife. I think we might have started with a mother, but to make it complete, just we'll repeat that slide again and add a couple of slides to it, and then we'll come to a very sensitive topic about misunderstood texts of Quran and Hadith about pertaining to women. Of course, as usual, we always begin with the Quran, and we read ووصينا الإنسان بوالديه حملته أمه وهنا على وهن وفصاله في عامين أن اشكر لي ولوالديك إلي المصير. And we, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, have commended people to honor their parents, their mothers. So we talk about the honor of both parents, but then singles out the mother. The mothers bore them through hardship upon hardship, and their weaning takes 2 years. So be grateful to me, meaning to Allah, and your parents to me is the final return. So I think the ayah is quite self-explanatory. Another or a second special emphasis on the role and honor of mothers appear also in another ayah in the Quran. ووصينا الإنسان بوالديه إحسانا حملته أمه كرها ووضعته كرها وحمله وفصاله 30 شهرا حتى إذا بلغ أشده وبلغ 40 سنة قال رب أوزعني أن أشكر نعمتك التي أنعمت علي وعلى والدي وأن أعمل صالحا ترضاه وأصلح لي في ذريتي إني تبت إليك وإني من المسلمين. It is an emphasis again, but to give more information. We're not going to detail it, inshallah. We have commended people to honor their parents. Again, both parents are deserving of parents. However, their mothers bore them in hardship and delivered them in hardship. The period of bearing and weaning is 30 months. And that's why some jurists concluded that it is 2 years al-fisal, and the fisal and pregnancy is 30. So they say the least, in their estimate at that time, the least period of pregnancy would be 6 months. And then we go to the ayah. In time, when the child reaches their prime at the age of 40, they pray, my Lord, pray to Allah, inspire me to always be thankful for your favors, which you blessed me and my parents with, and to do good deeds that please you, and instill righteousness in my offsprings, to guide our offsprings. I truly repent to you, and I truly submit to your will. A third one, I call it my favorite hadith, narrated by Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, that a man came to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he asked him a question: Man ahaqqu nasi bi husni sahabati? Who among all people is most deserving of my good or best companionship. The Prophet ﷺ said, your mother. So the man said, then who? Who's next? Number 2. The Prophet said, your mother. The man continued for the 3rd time, asking, who is next? Number 3. And the Prophet ﷺ said, your mother for the 3rd time. Only in the 4th time, he said, and your father. I always use this analogy, and I found that some other dua, mashallah, liked it. Dr. Zakir, the famous da'i of the PSTV, he probably heard it in some of my tapes, and he seemed to have liked it. Because that hadith, if I were to put it in Olympic terms, number 1, because 1, 2, and 3, and then the father comes. Number 1, gold medal is for the mother. Number 2, silver medal for the mother. Number 3, bronze medal for the mother. Sometimes I jokingly say, and the father may get some consolation certificates. So the hadith really is very favorable. There was, some years back, there was a big graduation, high school graduation in Dartmouth. I forgot that venue. It was a huge place. It might be the sportsplex. And they chose, every year they ask one of the clergy representing a particular religion to say a few words. So I was, reminding the graduates that as you achieve that turning point in your life, don't forget to be grateful to your parents, and more particularly to your mothers. And I mentioned that hadith. The whole huge gathering was clapping hands, and people come after that, expressing their wonderment about these beautiful words of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And one time, again, I was in some interfaith function, and one of the clergy who was there, he said, no, I like it. Your mother, and your father. So it touches, I'm just saying that by way of not boasting about anything, but maybe so that we might exchange some experiences of some of the areas that touches people's heart. I hope this was, alhamdulillah, one of them, but the credit goes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's inspired by him. I'll just spend only a few minutes, one more, since we spoke about the female as a daughter, wife, and mother, but suppose she doesn't belong to any of these. I say sister in faith in general, young and old, relative or not relative, the treatment of Muslim women. Here we find many examples from the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and are all from the sound hadith. You notice here when I say love of Ansar, it is B for Bukhari, M for Muslim. These are the two most prominent sources, authentic sources of hadith. Sometimes they say Ash-Shaykhan, meaning the two shaykhs, Bukhari and Muslim. Sometimes they use the term Muttafaqun alayh. Muttafaq alayh in the terminology of the sciences of hadith means that it is narrated by both two giants, Bukhari and Muslim, which gives it even more strength. The story of the love of Ansar. The Prophet ﷺ was reported to have stood up when he saw some of the Ansar in Medina, especially lots of women and kids coming from a wedding, and he stood up and he said something many people here would say, how could he say that? And he said about this Ansar, by Allah, أنتم من أحب الناس إلي. You're among the most beloved people by me, for the women and children. So that might be also a reflection, being sisters in faith, make them most worthy of love and respect. In another occasion, and again narrated in both Bukhari and Muslims, they were on a journey, and there was Arfada, I think is his name, there was some women carried on camels. Of course, men usually when they travel, they try to make the women traveling with them as comfortable as possible. So they were right. Usually, you don't have too many camels for each person. Sometimes people change, take turns, but of course, women would. And apparently, that person who was leading the camel, holding the camel, they make some songs as they go on to encourage the camel and raise their own morale. But apparently he started pushing too fast. And the Prophet ﷺ told him, رفقا بالقوارير. رفقا بالقوارير. I couldn't find an exact word for qawarir, but qarura means usually like a cherished vase, sometimes or oftentimes glass. Yeah, which is actually a great deal of tenderness on the part of the Prophet ﷺ, and appreciation also on the other hand. He didn't want to put them down. On the contrary, that women are tender by their nature, so don't be harsh with them. Rifqan, be gentle. And another hadith, إنما النساء شقائق الرجال. When the Prophet ﷺ does not speak only about daughters or wives or mothers, about any women in general, the gens, the whole category of women, that women are shaqa'iq of men. The word shaqa'iq, sometimes people translate it, most translations I think that's commonly given to this, sisters, because you can say shaqiqati, and this is my sister. But I have some reservation on that, even though it's a correct meaning, because the word shaqa'iq, because the Prophet say sisters of men, for example, which would make it definitely only about sisters. But shaqa'iq also comes from shaq, split half. And when you talk about split half, exactly, which half is better? Split half. This is even a much more eloquent and powerful way speaking about the basic equality between men and women. That's right, yes. That was covered also in a previous, one of the previous sessions. And ما أكرمهن إلا كريم ولا أهانهن إلا لئيم. It is only the person who is graceful or generous, who is good to women, يعني أكرمهن, honor them, and it's only a wicked person who insults them. Now, forgive me that these things are all known to you, but let us get to something, many of you might know it also, but more critical issues about texts, some misunderstood texts. Initially, I put the title Misunderstood Hadith, but I prefer to use texts because there is misunderstanding also of some ayat in the Quran. So I thought that the word text, I mean primary text, whether it is in the Quran or Hadith. First of all, inshallah, to give you an idea about the outline, we'll begin with maybe I made some modification, but I lost the file. I put some changes in the order, but it doesn't matter. But tell you what is happening here. First, we'll speak a little bit about rules of interpretation, because some of these questions, some, not all of them, really are very difficult when some Muslims are, when they shoot the question at you. It is not very easy to answer, and it causes doubt in the mind of a lot of young people in particular. So that's why I'm reminding ourselves again with the proper way of interpretation, because it's very applicable particularly to those controversial issues. Next to that, even though I might change, I might bring women, are women deficient in mind, but okay, we can keep it in order if if the file hasn't changed. But the reason I wanted to advance it, that I want to cover it in full because it has like 3 slides. And if Maghrib comes and we're in the middle of that, it might not really be a good way of coverage. But in any case, alhamdulillah, we seem to be doing reasonably well with time, even though we started a few minutes late. So let's just go on, and fixing is not a problem at all. I call it words, even though it's like 3 or 4 slides. Yeah, and because when you talk about methodology of interpretation or ilm al-usul, how to understand and interpret text, it is a big books are written on it. So I'm trying to simplify and just put it in its a humble way, that this is just a reminder of some of the salient points. First of all, a lot of people will tell you everybody is saying this, that Islam say that. Many Muslims say this must be Islam. Such and such sheikh said this. They don't realize that when we ask about any question pertaining to Islam, as I always repeat and have repeated even in the previous series on the sciences of the Quran, which was in several months extended, the first and most important source that some ulama call it the source of sources is the Quran, even above hadith, above the sound hadith. Number one. The second one is very important, even though it comes next to the Quran. And notice here I said authentic hadith. By the way, sometimes some scholars distinguish between hadith and sunnah. Others use the term interchangeably, but we're not getting into that. But when I speak about hadith, sunnah is included as well. So that is the second. And I'd like to bring attention to some of the bid'ah and dangerous thing that sometimes is circulating, and you find some groups calling themselves, we are Ahlul Quran, we are the people of the Quran. Well, we are all Ahlul Quran. But if what is meant by that, according to some of them, that hadith is not really that important, then this is dalala, this is totally off. And I could spend several sessions even speaking about the importance of sunnah and the evidence of sunnah as binding on Muslims so long as it's sound, sahih, from the Quran itself. There is lots of material available on that, but what I'm simply saying that authentic sunnah cannot be thrown away as if the Prophet ﷺ was just giving his opinion, and I can give my opinion too. I disagree with the Prophet. No. If the saying of the Prophet is not pertaining to something human, like I like this food or that food, which is not binding, it's not in the definition of sunnah, but sunnah or hadith, by way of explaining to us what Islam is all about. And like I said, the second point here, hadith explains the Quran, elaborates on the Quran, give us some more details, and also show us how to apply the Quran. The Quran say you pray, but how to pray, this is left to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there is this organic and important connection between Quran and hadith. It has, however, having said that, it is important, as you see in the highlight here, in the gold bar, not supersede the Quran. In other words, nobody can say, all right, the Quran says this, but the Prophet said that, and no, I'll take what the Prophet said. No. And actually, in reality, if the hadith is authentic in terms of narration and in terms of the textual criticism, it cannot be different from the Quran. They could be superficial, and I'm coming to that point, superficial conflict, but in reality, it is not. But we'll talk about that further. So if the Quran then has the priority, if the Quran supersedes anything, including the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in terms of the importance or priority, then it follows that if we have some debate or differing views about interpreting a particular hadith, You could be sincere, difference in understanding. What do we do? I don't say, okay, my opinion is this. Oh, I explained it. No. You looked into the Quran, the integrity of the revelation in the Quran on that particular topic, and you interpret the hadith if there is any question in the light of the Quran. Okay. Now, there are other things also to be kept in mind. And this is a partial, humble list, just to show that it's not as simple, because I know some people call me on the phone and say, ask a question. I said, well, this. The ayah is clear. The hadith is clear. Ya ibn al-halal, are you aware that there is another hadith also on the same topic? Did you look into the Quran to see what the Quran says so that you can understand that hadith better? So that's sometimes تعجل to rush to judgment. One of these is understanding the language of the Quran. You don't have to be a scholar, but you can refer to scholars who studied the Arabic language, who can tell you about the roots of the words, what they mean, and so on. And it is a sad commentary that a lot of Islamophobes who attack Islam either never read the Quran itself, but even those who read the Quran or Hadith from translation of meaning, which sometimes doesn't give the very accurate thing. They don't know where the word came from even. So at least some sound knowledge for everyone, of course, to understand the Quran, but for scholars, of course, they have to have an in-depth knowledge of it. And that's why in Islamic universities like Azhar and other major universities, Islamic universities in the world, Arabic language becomes a very, very major part of the education. The second thing is a rule that is known in Ulum al-Quran, in the sciences of the Quran, and also Usul, because there is some overlap, known in Arabic as Al-Qur'anu yufassiru ba'duhu ba'dan, which means Quran explaining itself. The reason, and those of you who have been in the sciences of the Quran, it might have been so many months, so just a quick reminder. The Quran says something about a particular topic, but the Quran is not organized by history or the succession or the date of revelation. It is not organized like textbooks, like Dr. Hani and myself used to teach in the university. You get a chapter on this topic, a chapter on that topic. So it is just by topic or subtopic. It is not like that. The Quran has unique way of conveying the information, but we don't have time to go into that wisdom. I think maybe some of the older recording might have that. There is good reason why the Quran is different from any other book of history or textbook in topics. Which means, in order to understand a particular ayah, it is imperative that you understand that you wouldn't find it all in one surah. Suppose you want to make a research on women in Islam, and you find the surah in the Quran, the fourth surah, it says women. For some people, especially outsiders, they say, all right, if I wanted to see how Islam views women, it is the surah. No, it is not like the chapters. You will find, yes, there are things about women in this surah, but there are many other things that does not relate to women. And there are many other references about women in many other surahs, like Talaq, for example, and several surahs, not only one. That make research a little difficult, but more scholarly. That if you want to understand the topic properly, you have to, for example, if you have a concordance of the Quran, physical or electronic, now it's available, you have to look, for example, under woman or women or imra'ah, but you have to have also some words carry the same meaning also. So you have to get the meanings, the words that are similar, and then you go through the whole Quran. You don't have to do it now. You can look under the index. Get all of these ayat, examine them carefully, because you have to understand them in the light of one another, not just insist on one or two texts and as if other texts do not exist. All right. The other thing is that there are, not every ayah in the Quran, but there are several ayat, even surahs in the Quran that has what is called in Arabic asbabun nuzul, meaning occasions of revelation, the occasion or setting in which this ayah or surah was revealed. For example, just to give a quick example, because we covered more of that in the series of the Quran. When the Prophet ﷺ was commanded, when he received the revelation and commanded to convey it to people, and he went on the hill and called people to come to him, and you know the story in Sirah, probably Dr. Saad and Dr. Mu'taz Jamal mentioned these things. But the point here is that one of his uncles was very discourteous, Abu Lahab, which literally means father of flames. That was not his real name, but his nickname, because he was a fiery person. And he insults the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Tabban lak alihada jama'tana. May you perish. This is what you're gathering us to tell us about all this stuff? So it is mockery, it is attack and insult. Okay? Now, you know in the Surah Al-Lahab for Quran, it was revealed in that occasion, and it mentioned Abu Lahab. تبت يدا أبي لهب وتب ما أغنى عنه ماله وما كسب إلى آخر الآية. So that occasion give us some indication of the meaning and implication of the ayah. Number 4 in that list, that oftentimes people fall into a very bad mistake in understanding the Quran. I'll tell you the rule first and explain it. This is a rule, again, of interpretation known as al-am alladhi yuradu bihi al-khas. Let me make it simple. Within the same Quran, the term, for example, an-nas appear obviously to refer in general sense or to specific people. How is that? When we read in the last surah in the Quran, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ, I seek refuge in the Lord of An-Nas. Can we say that only some of the people, only Muslims, only those who believe in God? The context here is that it must be understood general, which means general. Every human being on earth, past, present, in the future. Why? Because there is no creator but Allah. He is the Rabb of all people. Yet in Surah Al-Imran, it speaks about somebody brought news to Muslims in Medina that the idolatrous Arabs are preparing to invade them and attack them. And in the ayah, the same term, an-nas, was used twice. Anybody remember the ayah, الذين قال لهم الناس إن الناس قد جمعوا لكم فاخشوهم فزادهم إيمانا وقالوا حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل. Obviously, it doesn't talk about all humans. الناس here, even though it is general in some cases, here it doesn't talk about it. It's few. Some people say that even الناس could be one person. So it doesn't mean all people came to inform the Prophet. One or two. One even would do it. And those who gather to attack the Prophet ﷺ is not every human being from Adam who died centuries ago, or people who will be born, obviously, only to a subset or a category or group of people. And finally, something that's sometimes forgotten. That is, even when we interpret and observe all of these rules, and I put dots, there are also other things concerning the naskh, which supersession, lots of things that has to be considered. Just this is a sample of it. But I say in any case, even if you follow all the proper rules of interpretation, if you make an interpretation, no matter how nice and tight argument you're making, but you violate the basic definitive, something like there's no argument about it, Quranic values or concepts or precepts, then it is not valid. Of course, we hear about these twisted things, not only this time, in these days, but even during the Kharijites, after the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who have an amazing, strange, twisted interpretation of things. So they refer to the Quran. There's no problem. Yet, the way they do it and slaughter people, violate basic rule in the Quran, in Surah Al-Ma'idah. You kill one innocent person is like killing all the people. You hear about some of them encountering some Muslims, past and present. And if, you say you're a Muslim, you say, yes, yes. How many prayers, how many prayers you have to pray in day and night? A person might be nervous, they slaughter them. Yeah, suppose he's ignorant, suppose whatever, suppose he's asi. Even if he's a kafir, you have no right to kill him, because kufr in itself is not a reason to kill a person, and the ayah would apply that you're aggressive. In other words, this is an example. This is a definitive issue, the sanctity, for example, of human life, except as the Quran, of course, indicate, like nafs aw al-fasad fil ard. The Quran also opened the door, but you don't say I don't care about. So these are, now, there may be some issues when you look at hadith. And somebody might say, a lot of people say that, by the way, those who just have like surface reading and so on, or they have some agenda of the so-called the new Islam, a la Western desires and a la Orientalists and so on. So I say, no, this hadith, no thoughts immediately. This hadith is contradictory with the Quran, and therefore throw it away. Sound, whatever sound, it contradicts. Do they understand whether indeed there is real contradiction or surface, apparent, to be humble, surface or apparent contradiction? And I said, to start with, are you sure that there is no way of reconciling both of these? You want me to give you a little example, because in methodology sometimes it gets. I'll give you one simple example. Okay? A hadith. إن الميت لا يعذب ببكاء أهله عليه. The hadith is sound. The person who is deceased, when he dies, immediately, meaning after his death, is punished or tortured because of his family weeping or crying over his death. Some people would say, that hadith, no matter how you tell me it's wrong. It contradicts the Quran. On the surface, they sound right, but it's not. Why? Yes, there is more than one ayah in the Quran. أَلَّا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى وَلَا تَزِرُ, that nobody carries the mistakes or is punished for the wrong done by another. Isn't that clear enough? So, okay, therefore the hadith should be thrown away. Why should he be punished? And unfortunately, you find some scholars even trying to find some ways, to explain it. Some ways are better than others. I'll give you the lesser, not so good, or not so convincing reconciliation. It's not reconciliation at any price, it has to be well-founded. They say, if indeed he asked his family to cry over him, it's a rather strange justification. He asked them, so he's punished because he asked them to do something wrong. But the hadith, it says al-mayyit. It didn't say al-mayyit who told his family, cry after him. You get the point? And you know what could be a very simple, but it required some work. Some scholars made a very interesting and solid explanation. What does the word yu'adhab mean? Punished, or as we find in other ahadith, that the person before burial especially, and even after that, he has some feel of what's happening. Even after he leaves the truth, some hadith says that he hears the sound of their shoes when they bury him and go home, start going home. So there is some degree of awareness, not of the dead body, obviously, the spirit. So يعذب ببكاء أهله means that he is feeling sad. يعذب عذبتني يا أخي والله زعلان. يعني he is feeling very sad and grieved that his family is suffering. And that's why, of course, when the Prophet ﷺ teaches us not to, sadness is okay, tears okay, but da'wah jahiliyyah, why is he? ده انت مت وانت صغير يا اخوي, it's too early for you to die. All of these things, that if we نحتسب, the Prophet himself cried when his son Ibrahim died. So if we do that also, it is good for our deceased loved ones. Okay, you get the point? But on the surface, throw it away. Quran and Quran. Didn't you say earlier that Quran supersedes everything? And use the same rules without understanding to do. I hope that this makes it a bit clearer, not too dry. Okay. If indeed it appeared after lots of work and thinking that there is no reconcilable way of taking those texts, reconciling those texts, one thing I should say even before that, you say, all right, I can't see it now, but maybe some other scholar later, it's later time, might find some way of reconciling. So I have to have the humbleness and humility not to say throw this and throw that arbitrarily. Say, all right, maybe I couldn't find, nobody found, but who knows? How many of us knew about that reconciliation with the hadith by show of hands? See, it's like not everybody. One has to give a chance if there is other way of reconciliation. But what to do until this is done? What you can do is probably reinterpret the hadith, because hadith understood properly can never, if you take it on the surface, literal, cannot contradict the Quran. So you say, maybe the hadith mean this. And this rule is very important as we come to some of the hadith that sound shocking to some people. Okay? All right. Let us begin. Keep it in the order here, it doesn't matter. Why is it that the testimony of a female is only worth half the testimony of a male? You know what? This mistake is almost identical to the mistake that some people quote one part of one ayah, I think it's Surah Al-Nisa, about Mawarith, للذكر مثل حظ الأنثيين. We spend an hour to show that this is not to be understood this way. In the same ayah, there are also examples where there is equality, like he said, أبويه لكل واحد منهما السدس. This is exactly the same. Because to say in Islam the worth of a female testimony is half, because there is one part of the longest ayah in the Quran, but they love that part. فرجل واستشهدوا شهيدين من رجالكم فإن لم يكونا رجلين فرجل وامرأتان ممن ترضون من الشهداء. And sometimes they don't quote a little bit after that, which explain, but we'll inshallah explain it fully بإذن الله تعالى. And like inheritance, they say there is a rule, woman is half a man. And some people, of course, say, is that the honor that your Islam gives to women? Consider them half, no matter what? This is the same mistake. So let's go then and look at not this ayah alone, all the ayat in the Quran about testimony, okay, to see whether this is a consistent rule or not. I can assure you that the great majority of ayat in the Quran, with two exceptions, I mentioned that inshallah soon, all the other ayat in the Quran, and there are many about testimony, does not speak about number of men an equal number or double number of female. If there is that, show me. But what the Quran says is the moral duty to me not to conceal shahada. وَلَا تَكْتُمُوا الشَّهَادَةَ. That if you witness something, don't hesitate to come. وَلَا يَأْبَ الشُّهَدَاءُ إِذَا مَا دُعُوا. But there is no question of number of males or females. What are the two exceptions? One clear exception that people are not aware of, that is in itself enough to demolish this notion of having general rule of 2 for 1, is in Surah An-Nur, from ayah 6 to 10. I'm not going into the detail. This is known as the case of mula'ana. But basically, if a person accuses his wife of committing adultery, okay, and he didn't have the requisite 4 witnesses seeing everything in detail, that he made that testimony 4 times that this happened, okay? And it says, of course, that the wrath of Allah will be upon him, or a curse. One of them is curse, one is a wrath, if he were a liar. And then the ayah says, وَيَدْرَأُ عَنْهَا الْعَذَابَ أَن تَشْهَدَ أَرْبَعَ شَهَادَاتٍ بِاللَّهِ إِنَّهُ لَمِنَ الْكَاذِبِينَ. But a woman will not be punished based on his 4 times affirming. It says there will be no punishment if indeed there is a rule, she must make testimony 8 times. No? Exactly the same. 4 times. But again, there is the wrath or curse of Allah if indeed she's lying. So here a case of equality of shahada. And then there is also the other exception, which the only one, the second exception, that everybody take it as a general rule. It is the 282nd ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah. As I mentioned earlier, this is the longest ayah in the Quran, and it deals all the ayah with financial contract, business, business ayah. You see, and that raises a question: why, in that particular case, it was mentioned? If you go back to the ayah itself, this is the problem. Some a piece of an ayah كده ننمنم زي ما بدي أزأز حاجة وياخد سودانية هنا وبستاشيو هنا، مش أزأز القرآن. أوكي؟ لو ترجع للآية يقول لك فرجل وامرأتان ممن ترضون من الشهداء، يعني شهادة المرأة مش مرفوضة. ترضون يعني like man, she is knowledgeable, she's يعني generally speaking, and she has the integrity like men, which is a requirement that a judge would require from either gender. But then it gives one reason in the context of business contracts: أن تضل إحداهما فتذكر إحداهما الأخرى. Now, the word تضل literally could have one of 2 meanings. Okay, there is dalal in a negative sense, okay, but that contradicts the fact that they have to be qualified in the first place and have the integrity. So some understand tadil, get confused. Their nature, marriage and love, there is their life. Mashakil, all of that. Isn't that true? Tell me. Did you hear your wife sometimes say, you forgot until I told you? So the issue of forgetfulness in itself does not seem to have really. However, it is obvious in our experience as human beings that if you're sitting and listening to people speaking about a topic that you're not really that interested in, isn't that a reason that you don't pay much attention to details? I was with some honorable brothers and honorable hosts last night, and I was giving that example that if you're sitting with medical doctors, you're not a doctor, you're an engineer or whatever, social worker, and doctors are using all these facsimile words here, and okay, you might understand something, but it is not your field, it is not your interest, so you may remember something and forget details. Well, if you forget this is about the doctors are talking about, no problem. They're not going to ask you to act as a doctor. But here is a rights of people. You're making testimony about financial contract that might have thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. So because an average woman, not, the word average means not a typical woman, for example, not only the society at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but even today in many poorer countries, women do not pay that much attention because there are lots of homework for her, lots of duties. Not every woman is a professional. And as such, they don't even normally be present when contracts are negotiated. But if they are there, because of their lack of interest, they may not follow all the details. So the ayah here doesn't say that woman is half, because تذكر إحداهم. So if there is another woman, they corroborate one another's together, so that more justice can be done. But then, a question, I mentioned that also to my brothers, a question that I personally directed towards a famous scholar of Sharia, Ustaz of Sharia, alayhi rahmatullah, Dr. Taha Jabir Alwani. I said, Ya Dr. Taha, suppose a contract, financial contract is being negotiated. And there was a man there who was like a clerk, and he is not interested in business, doesn't know much about business, has other, even if he's a doctor, he wouldn't even follow. Okay? And then there was a young lady with a master's degree from a reputable university like Harvard, and she has a master and specialization in finance. Say, do we take the ayah in that strict sense without looking into qualifications or not? She is definitely far more qualified than doctors and other people who are sitting there. It's not her field, yet it is her field. In fact, her testimony becomes even more credible than man. So that's why some people take things بدون تفكير, just the text, literal. And then there is something very important, and I wouldn't tell you how he answered me, because the answer is coming in this. But I wanted to make it general, not as based on one scholar's reply. As a rule, when you look at an issue like that, is it really consistent with maqasid al-Sharia, the supreme objectives of Sharia, to insist that a master's in finance must have another woman to corroborate, and that's her bread and butter? And what is the maqsad al-Sharia from that process of testimony? Adl. Adl is a very important thing. Adl and rights of people. And definitely her testimony. In fact, his answer exactly was said to be two things. One, he said, regardless of any kind of testimony, it is up to the judge, the authority and responsibility of the judge, to evaluate the competence, the honesty and competence of witnesses. So they must be first minimum, person is trustworthy, man or woman, but competence also, do they know what they're talking about? And he said, no, there is absolutely no problem to achieve the maqsad of Sharia, which is adl, by accepting her testimony on par with others. And then, of course, I might add humbly to this, is that in Sharia also, an interpretation of any complex issue, one has to distinguish between ends and means. Ends and means. When the Quran established that and gave the illah or reason, if there is confusion, the other one would remind. If that's not there, there is also a rule in usul. I hope I'm not going too deep in that. يقول علماء الأصول يعني الحكم يدور مع علته وجودا وعدما. يعني if the reason why, as the Quran says, تذكر إحداهما الأخرى. If the illah here is to have corroborating evidence so that the testimony does not do justice to anyone, then if that illah is not there, then the rule also could change. The second lack of distinction, which is important as well, is to distinguish between ends and means. The number of men and women, this is a means, not an end. The end of it is justice. Okay? So we don't insist on procedure or mechanism and destroy what is more important, and that is to achieve justice. Furthermore, two things that the scholars didn't differ much on. One is that a testimony of even a woman that she saw, especially in the beginning of Ramadan, she cited the crescent of Ramadan, is accepted just a testimony of a man. Another issue, okay, I have one before the other, that's okay, that a testimony of woman or women alone without a man. Some people know, yeah, I start making the calculation. If you don't have two men and two women, so you get 4 women because everyone, this is aqim, this is argument that doesn't make sense. The woman testimony in matters that men are not privy to, like suckling the baby, like, other issues that women only are the ones who are exposed to alone, their testimony, because that's their special, that's their nature. They're together on that. Now, before moving on to the third one, I don't know how much we're doing with time. We have 4 more minutes. طيب, so the more tacky issues we have to wait for next time, but I can finish at least one more. This is Islamophobes love this kind of thing. They refer to hadith, and by the way, that's sahih, that a woman is created from ضلع أعوج. ضلع means rib, but أعوج translation is another issue. Some translate it crooked, which is negative. وأن أعوج ما في الضلع أعلاه. And that means her head. She's crooked, and the most crookedness is in her head. Is that true? To start with, this is my humble understanding of it. Bent actually referred to curved. Curved. And curved versus straight line may reflect nature. Engineers, مثلا, it's easy to make straight lines. But when you make a curve, that becomes more artistic. Okay. My humble understanding of it, I could be right or wrong, but I think I have some basis for it. I'll give you the reason why other ahadith clarify that. The woman has a nature that's different from man's nature. Sometimes men's nature is, they're more emotional, they are more artistic even, they're more inclined to art. Not exclusively, of course, because you have architecture, which means there are arts and architecture. Also, okay, so there's inclination in her nature, so it's not crooked. Secondly, the fact that women's analogically curved is not quantitatively, it is qualitatively. Yani difference between men and women is not a reason for inferiority or superiority. If man thinks more straight and is more firm in decision, that's because the family needs it. If a woman is more emotional, is more, sensitive, okay, it doesn't mean that she's negative. Both are complementary roles that both of them are. Inshallah, I finish quickly on that. why this might be a defensible one. If you connect it with other ahadith, the idea connecting the pieces. The Prophet ﷺ in another hadith say, فَإِنْ أَنْتَ ذَهَبْتَ تُقِيمُهُ كَسَرْتُ وَكَسْرُهَا طَلَاقُهَا. That if you try to force that bent rib to be straight, you'll break it. And breaking means talaq, divorce, which means take woman as she is. Don't make her in your own image as a male. ولذلك الحديث يقول استمتع بها, enjoy life with her على عوج, even though she's different from you. She doesn't have to be like you. You don't have to be like her. And then one thing that we notice about those who take that hadith as negative and attack about the dignity of women and all the other stuff, in that first hadith actually begins استوصوا بالنساء خيرا and end واستوصوا بالنساء خيرا, beginning of hadith. And the end of the hadith, be kind and gentle to women. استوصوا, I commend you to be good to women. There is no confirmation that I have seen in the Quran of the understanding that's common among people that women are irrational or bent or worse, even crooked. So inshallah, we stop at that. And Allah willing, if we start hopefully on time, 6:30 next Friday, we'll get to the more challenging question, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. خلاص الحمد لله.
I'll see you on YouTube. Not
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله.